All right, now I want you to create a function called count occurrences. This function takes an array and a search element and returns the number of times that search element has occurred in this array. For example, here in our numbers array, we have a single instance of 1. So if we call this function and pass 1, we get 1. If I add another 1 here, now you can see we have 2 instances of 1. Or if we call this function with a number that does not exist in the array, we get 0. So start with the simplest implementation for this function. Once you get that working, then to challenge yourself, implement this function using the reduce method in arrays. Because here essentially we are reducing this entire array into a number. And that number represents the number of times a given element has occurred in our array. You will see my solution next. All right, here's the basic implementation. So we declare a count variable and initialize it to 0. Now we need to iterate over this array. And if you find this search element, we're going to increment count. At the end of this function, we'll return count. Very easy. So for let element of array. Now, if this element equals the search element, we simply increment count. And finally, we return count. So that's the most basic implementation. Now let's see how we can use the reduce method to achieve the same thing with less code. So instead of this implementation, we're going to use array.reduce. Here we need to pass a callback function with 2 parameters, accumulator and current. And this goes to this code block. So this accumulator represents the number of times this search element has occurred in our array. So I'm going to initialize this to 0, like this. Now, every time this callback function is called, we want to compare this current value with search element. If they are equal, we should return accumulator plus 1. Otherwise, we should return accumulator. So we can do something like this. We define a constant called occurrence. Now, if current equals search element, here I'm going to use the conditional operator. So if they're equal, I'm going to add 1 to accumulator. Otherwise, I'm going to add 0 to accumulator. And finally, we're going to return accumulator plus occurrence. Now, let me show you how this works. So let's do a console.log. We're going to log 3 values. One is our accumulator, and the other 2 are current as well as the search element. And one last thing we need to do here is to actually return this value. So let's inspect this program. We save the changes. Here in the console, you can see this callback function has been called 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And here's the result, because we don't have -1 in this array. Now let me change this to a value that we have so you can see exactly what is happening under the hood. So I'm going to change -1 to 1, save the changes. Now let's see what's happening. So in the first round, our accumulator is 0, current is 1, so is search element. So accumulator is incremented by 1. So in the second round, accumulator is 1, current is 2, and our search element, as we can see, is always 1. Now in this case, these 2 numbers are not equal, so accumulator is not changed. So we simply return accumulator plus 0. We want to make sure to keep this number as we go through this array. Now finally, in the last call, you can see accumulator is still 1, and in this case, the current value and the search element are equal, so accumulator is incremented by 1, and that's what we get out of this reduce method.